Thank you so much, Musa, and a very warm welcome, to everyone. Colleagues, I'm just going to introduce Trishen and we go straight to the session for today. But just to tell you how the session came about. So we have principals in our previous sessions talking about requesting for interventions because they're actually in rural schools, speaking about how can we actually accommodate webinar topics that has to do with interventions. And we actually sat, when planning for the webinar, and we reached out to Trishen, who was more than happy to actually, share his best practices from the district is coming from in Gauteng. So we actually talked about identifying learners for intervention, and Trishen actually covered the same question yesterday, which is actually going to be covering today. And the question is, how do we identify learners at risk? Trishen, I will allow you to introduce yourself and take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, RK. Good day, colleagues. Before I begin, I just want to confirm that I'm clear and audible.
100%.
Okay. Good day, colleagues. My name is Trishen Maraj. I am an intermediate phase assessment official from Sedibeng East District in Gauteng province. I just want to state at the onset that, like RK just mentioned, I'm sharing best practice with you with regards to what and how we have assisted schools last year in particular when it comes to identifying learners at risk. We need to understand that there are various provinces in this webinar. So certain things that I may discuss may not be processes that are applicable in your province. However, nothing stops you from taking the good practice and sharing it amongst your provincial officers or your schools in the province that you are coming from. It might also be that maybe you are doing something even better than what I'm about to present as a good practice. And it's always good then for you to share with us so that we can learn from the process, because that is the idea at the end of the day. Identifying learners at risk and the interventions that need to be implemented to them. Colleagues, before we even identify before we even implement interventions to these learners, we need to identify the learners at risk. And we know something that has stood even pre-COVID is the DBE release circular D2 of 2017. That circular applies to all of us. Basically, that circular is guiding us on the identification of underperforming schools. Now, we know that we do not want to be regarded. If you're a principal, you don't want your school to be regarded as an underperforming school in your district. If you're a deputy principal or HOD, you don't want to be a supervisor of a subject that is deemed underperforming within your school. And if you're an educator, you definitely don't want your subject to be regarded as an underperforming subject. Now, I don't want to get into details with regards to that circular, but when that circular was released, it's important to note that we have to have systems in place as a school and as a district and as a province to ensure that we try our best in eliminating as many learners at risk as possible. So as a district last year, the Gauteng province retracted the possible retention schedule process and the learner at risk process. Now, like I said, this is a national webinar, so some provinces are thinking, what is Mr. Maraj talking about? It's basically a process that we use as a province to identify learners at risk at school level, to assist the teachers in supporting those learners at risk, and thereby assisting the district to support the school in supporting those learners at risk. Now, this process was retracted last year, and as of this past week, the process is still retracted this year in the Gauteng province. But we need to understand that as a school, as a district, it's important to have something in place to continue this process, even if it is not aligned exactly to what is initially required, so that it assists us throughout the academic year. Now, in sharing my good practice, I want to state that there are positives that came out from establishing our own criteria from term 3 of 2020 to identify learners at risk at school level. And in completing this process, the positives that came out of it was, number one, as a district, we only had one underperforming school in our district, primary school, last year. Now that's based on that assessment circular D2 of 2017. The second thing is our results were actually not that impaired compared to previous years, even though we had the COVID pandemic and the implication that affected us as a country. So our results were still actually very good in entirety. The other thing is the amount of appeal cases that were dealt with at school level and at district level were actually to a bare minimal. We, in fact, didn't have any GET appeals that had to be taken to provincial office. We managed to close the minimal amount of appeals that we had at school level and at that level, because we had this system in place that we implemented in supporting our schools to support the learners. So we could show that we did inform parents that your child has been identified as a learner at risk. This is why your child was identified as a learner at risk. And from a school's point of view, from a district point of view, this is how we envisage to assist your learner so that we can give him or her the best opportunity to pass on his or her own merit come the end of the year. So colleagues, this session is basically going to be about the criteria that we used last year to identify learners at risk within our district. Now, remember I said that because the process was retracted, we had to sell this idea to our schools, who in fact went on board and actually were not difficult in implementing it, in assisting us to implement this process. So we must understand also that we are in different schools, we are in different environments, we are in different provinces, different districts. So as a school, we need to take into consideration what factors, taking COVID into consideration as the most important factor that affects identifying a learner at risk. What other factors may affect our school, and develop criteria based on what is affecting your school. So as a district, we last year identified 5 criteria that I'm going to discuss with you now. And then come this year, when we are trying to implement the process, we might have more criteria. We might have less criteria, depending on the COVID implication currently. So colleagues, please bear with me through this process. I'm going to speak a mouthful. And I hope that before we leave the session, that you at least take away something from the session. So colleagues, who are our learners at risk? The first identified learner at risk is your 2020 or your previous year's NP learners, the learners that did not meet the minimum requirement as per assessment guidelines and circulars and policies. Now, where do we get this information? At the end of the year, when you print your promotion schedules on SA SAMs, there is a module. On that module, there are codes where you can select your NP learners and your PG learners. Now, for foundation phase and intermediate phase, it's the same module that you can go to. It's called 12.9.15.1. This module will give you the list of learners that have not met the requirements, the NP learners that have to repeat the grade come the next year. Now, that is provided you select the NP code under that module. For senior phase, it is the same information that you get, but it's just under another module. It's 12.9.15.3. So if you select the code NP, it is again going to give you under that module the list of learners that have not met the promotion requirements in that year. Hence, they have to repeat the grade in the next year. Now, if you choose the code in the same modules, PG, then you will also get the progressed learners, the learners that are progressed from the current year to the next year due to whatever reason. So we must understand that when you capture data on SASMs, the data is automatically, when the school uploads at the end of the term onto the dashboard, the data is automatically transferred to the dashboard. In this case, with the NP and PG learners, you will be able to get this information on the dashboard. But moving forward, I'm going to explain to you there's one case where the data does not transfer. So in conclusion of the first point, we've identified learners at risk. Number one, if they did not meet the promotion requirements of the previous year. That means that once a teacher enters the classroom for the very first time to administer the very first lesson, he or she should already know that in my class, in this subject, I have learners at risk based on these printouts. Now, I'm not even going to go into individual support plans and subject improvement plans, etc., because that's how do we intervene? How do we assist these learners? How do we support these learners? But what I want you to understand is that before you can even present your first lesson of the year, you as an educator should already know there are learners at risk in front of me. The second type of learner at risk are your progressed learners. Now, again, like I said earlier, the same modules that we just spoke about in 12.9.15.1 for intermediate and foundation phase and 12.9.15.3 for senior phase. If you select the code PG, it gives you the list of learners that are progressed to the next grade for whatever particular reason. Now, progress learners, we are identifying as learners at risk, or a criteria to identify learners at risk. But under progressed, there are 4 categories. A learner can be progressed to the next grade if he or she is over age. Now, there's a formula that we use to check if a learner is over age. It is admission year plus number of years in grade, in phase, plus grade. So basically, I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a learner who's 17 years old in grade 7. Admission year is 6, plus number of years in phase is 3, because a learner can only be a maximum number of years in a grade 4 times. But to go through an entire phase, it's 3 years in a phase. So 6 plus 3 is 9. 9 plus 7 because the learner is in grade 7, is 16. This learner is 17. That means that this learner progresses to the next grade due to overage, irrespective of how badly that learner did. Okay, so that's the first sub-criteria, if I can call it, or category of a progress learner. The second category is number of years in the phase. Or let's do number of years in the grade first. So, for example, if a learner failed grade 5 in 2020, it means that that learner will repeat grade 5 in 2021. And no matter what that learner does academically this year, that learner will progress at the end of the year due to number of years in the grade. If the learner doesn't, on his or her own merit, pass the year, then that learner is progressed to the next grade due to number of years in the grade. The next category is the number of years in the phase. I'll give you an example. If a learner is in grade 1 and the learner has to repeat grade 1, the learner then cannot repeat grade 2 and grade 3 due to a maximum of 4 years in a phase. So if the learner fails grade 1, repeats grade 1, no matter how badly the learner does in grade 2 and or grade 3, the learner is automatically progressed to the next grade due to the number of years in the phase. Now we must understand that there are policies and circulars and guidelines that are given to us by provincial officers. They are those that are given to us from DBE. And in some cases, we may not agree with those policies and guidelines, but we anyway have to adhere to them. Because I know that the mentality is, and I said it in yesterday's session as well, parents, guardians, learners know policy sometimes even better than us. They know that if they fail a certain year and they repeat the next year, no matter what they do at school academically or how badly they do, they are going to be progressed out of that grade or out of that phase. And that is the unfortunate part. But like I said, policy is there and we need to adhere to policy. But we can identify these learners as learners at risk and try our best to support them during the current academic year to see if we can assist them or assist them in assisting themselves to pass on their own come the end of the year. So, colleagues, that's the third criteria or category under progress learners. Now there is a fourth. The fourth one, senior phase, have always had adjustments and condonations, or they've had it longer than the foundation phase and the intermediate phase. For the foundation phase and the intermediate phase, this was only implemented last year. And it was implemented via National Assessment Circular 7 of 2020. National Assessment Circular 7 of 2020 basically introduced adjustments and condonation for the foundation phase and the intermediate phase and gave us direction as to how in the GET we are supposed to apply this circular. Now, basically, in a nutshell, the circular says that if a learner does not meet the requirements of that phase, then the learner can be adjusted in a maximum of 3 subjects by a maximum of 5% per subject. Now, I want to give you an example with regard to that. Let's say a learner is in the intermediate phase, doesn't meet the requirements for social sciences and NS Tech. And that learner, we know that the minimum requirement for those subjects to pass is 40%. Now, as it stands, if the learner passes everything else and fails those 2 subjects, the learner does not meet the minimum requirements. But with the implementation of this circular, if the learner has 36% for NS Tech and 37% for social sciences, it means that the school can apply the circular to say that the learner can be adjusted with 4% in NS Tech and 3% in social sciences, which gives the learner the 40% minimum for both subjects for the learner to pass on his or her own. What's important to note here is that you as a school are not allowed to physically change that mark from 36 and 37 to 40 and 40. You leave the mark as it is. You circle the mark in the report card, but SA SAMS will give you the option of changing the promotion decision and then giving a reason. And last year's reason, according to SA SAMS, was due to governmental circulars. So when the learner gets the report card, he or she will see that they have not met the requirements on their own for those subjects, but the comment will be progressed to the next grade due to adjustments. Okay, so this year, we don't know as yet because we'll have to wait for DBE, whether we are going to again implement adjustments with regards to specifically the foundation phase and the intermediate phase, because the senior phase, like I said, they've always been doing this process. The other thing that comes with that circular is the condonation. Condonation basically means that if a learner passes all his or her subjects, but doesn't meet the requirements only in maths, irrespective of how many percent that learner has achieved for maths, that learner is condoned for maths, hence the learner meets the requirements and is progressed to the next grade due to condonation in mathematics. Now, I don't want to go in detail with regards to the circular, but I'm just giving you an idea of how we as a district, as assessment officials in GET, have used what we have received from GDE and DBE to identify our criteria to use when we're identifying learners at risk. So we are saying that if a learner is progressed due to any one of these 4 criteria, according to progress learners, that learner is regarded as a learner at risk and will remain a learner at risk up until the end of the year once the promotion schedules are signed off. Moving forward, colleagues, I want to state that there's one glitch. As remember I said earlier, there's one glitch when it comes to the data that's captured on SAMS that needs to be transferred, is automatically transferred to the dashboard. Any learner that is progressed due to adjustments and or condonation, these learners, there is no specific point or place on SAMS that you can get these learners lists. Hence, there is no place on the dashboard where you can print these learners lists. So our schools had to do it manually. Go to the promotion schedule, check the learners that are under the code PG, and then from there, sift out those that were progressed due to governmental circulars because of the adjustments and or condonation that was implemented. And in using National Assessment 7 and the National Assessment Circular 7 of 2020, we use it in coordination or correlation with National Assessment Circular 2 of 2020. And this was a DBE-mediated circular that assisted us in how do we go about promoting or progressing learners at the end of last year. But like I said, when it comes to promotion and progression, these change every year. And I'm sure before the end of the year, we'll receive further guidance, further guidelines and circulars from DBE to assist us in trying to promote or progress those learners. But as of last year, yes, colleagues, so far we've discussed two criteria that we have used. The NP learners of the previous year, the PG learners of the previous year, and under PG, the four types of progress learners that were identified as learners at risk. Now you will have, once I'm done with all five criteria, you will see that you might have one learner that falls under three criteria. But at the end of the day, that learner is identified as a learner at risk. The third criteria that we have used, colleagues, is the comorbidity learners. Comorbidity learners are learners that basically have underlying health issues where parents and guardians were allowed to apply for those learners to work from home, to be resourced at home from the school on a bi-weekly basis. Basically means that that learner doesn't have a face-to-face interaction with teaching and learning. The learner, especially last year or from last year, we had alternate days or alternate week timetables. What do those learners do when they are at home? It's the same for the comorbidity learners, but this is every day. What's important to note is this. Government Gazette 43578 was mediated last year. And at the back of that Gazette, there's the application form for parents or guardians to apply for their learners to stay at home based on proven underlying health issues. Now, if a school can produce that completed application and approval form, we regard those learners as learners at risk. Because that, like we said, that learner is not having a face-to-face interaction with the educator like the other learners. The other thing is, what are the chances of that learner actually being supervised at home or assisted by parents or guardians at home? Because that government gazette clearly states that if you as a parent or a guardian apply for this application of comorbidity, it means that you are taking on the responsibility as much as the educator in the classroom to ensure that your child is supervised when the child is at home, that the child completes all of the informal activities that is provided to him or her by the school on a bi-weekly basis, and that that resources that is completed then by the learner is sent back to the school so that the relevant educators can mark and give feedback to the learner. Now, a lot of parents need to understand that they are responsible as much as the educator. We cannot just apply for comorbidities and think, come the end of the year, I'm going to appeal if my child does not meet the requirements. That government gazette can be used in an appeal case because the parent is supposed to know what is his or her responsibility. Now, resource packs, we used to call it labs, are sent home with all of the work that is basically planned to be taught within the 2 weeks by a teacher. So the learner is actually going to be kept busy for 2 weeks based on what teaching and learning is happening in the classroom. But we felt that this learner needs to be identified as a learner at risk because you might have that brilliant learner anyway who applies for comorbidity, stays at home, gets resourced, sends the labs back, the teacher marks, gives feedback back to the learner passes throughout the year. But we felt that we must still keep comorbidity learners, irrespective of how well they do on the learner at risk or a possible retention or an identification of learners at risk page list, because anything can happen during the course of the year. So that learner will only be removed from that list once the promotion schedule is printed at the end of the academic year. It's important to note that our schools are different, and certain schools have more resources than others. But fact that the government gazette was released and there are learners that may have applied for comorbidities, and if the school approves that comorbidity, then the school is responsible as well to make sure that they do their part in assisting those learners. Whether or not at the end of the year those learners don't meet the requirements, but at least you've identified that child, and you must be able to prove the support that you've given that child, even from school and that child being at home. But I don't want to dwell on that now because that might be a topic for another session. So 3 criteria so far that we have used to identify learners at risk. The fourth one, the fourth criteria, colleagues, is the newly admitted learner. Now, we know from experience, you have schools that admit learners 2 weeks, 2 days before the end of a term. Some of those learners come without a report card from the previous school, and those learners are admitted to our school. What do we do then? The cases where learners actually come with a report card and the learner is placed in the school, you must understand that as long as a learner is newly admitted to a school during the course of a year, that learner should be regarded as a learner at risk up until the end of the year when he or she passes on his or her own merit according to the promotion requirements. Because you might have a learner that comes from a school and has level 7s for everything, and then comes to your school, engages in teaching and learning, and is assessed. Come the end of the term, the child fails, so doesn't meet the requirements. So you also have the case where a child may come to your school with below average marks. And then at the end of the term, you find that after engaging with teaching and learning and assessing, this child is now in your top 10 in the grade. We must understand that the level of teaching and learning and assessing in schools across the country is different. The level is different. It doesn't matter if we are using DBE released ATPs and POAs, and we are following Bloom's and Barrett's taxonomies. We know that the level is different for whatever reason. So we as a school and us as a district, we've decided that no, if a learner is newly admitted to that school, irrespective of how well that learner is doing or how well that learner did, that learner is to be regarded as a learner at risk up until he or she passes at the end of the year on his or her own merit. So that's the fourth criteria that we have used to identify learners at risk last year. The fifth criteria that we have used: if a learner achieves a -1 for any formal task that is recorded to form part of the SBA or the year mark for any subject, that learner must be regarded as a learner at risk, because there is a assessment gap. We must understand that you might have an activity or you might have a task, and within a task, you might have 2 activities. Now, us as district office, when we sign off on promotion schedules or term schedules, we get the composite report card mark or percentage. We don't see under that mark how many tasks, and then under that task, how many activities were actually completed. That can only be done at school level. So we are saying that from a school level, if a learner misses an activity and or a task, it is the responsibility of the educator to, under every circumstance, try to administer that task or activity, because it will lead to the promotion or progression decision at the end of the year. Now, we have used, this year, we've received National Assessment Circular 1 of 2021. And if you go to 8.3 of National Assessment Circular 1 of 2021, it states that if a learner misses, especially the mid-year school-based test and then the end of the year school-based test, the school must make sure that they tried everything in their power to administer that task. And if they can't, then they give the learner a -1. Now, what does the -1 state? The -1 states that the learner missed the task due to a valid reason. But even if it's not a valid reason, you put in -1. The weighting of that task is then shared amongst the remaining SBA tasks for that subject in that grade for the rest of the year. So the report card will not show that the learner has a -1 if there have been 2 tasks in the subjects for the term and the child only missed 1 task where the child got -1, because the other task, the remaining task mark, will be reflected on the report. So we are saying that if a learner, for whatever reason, achieves a -1 in a task or an activity within a task, that child must be regarded as a learner at risk up until the end of the year, when schools are supposed to make sure that all learners complete their SBA tasks and the promotion schedule is printed. Now, it's important, I said it earlier, sometimes we may not agree with the policies that are given to us, but we have to adhere to it as best as we can. And yes, there's a lot of disadvantages of such policies, and we know of these disadvantages. I'll share an example with you quickly, and why specifically the -1. We had a learner last year. The learner came to school in term 1. There was no term 2. The learner didn't go back to school in term 3. The child only went back to write the end of the year school-based test, did well, and passed. The child is academically strong. But my question is it fair that that child missed a term 3 without valid reason, got a -1 in his or her report card, and then came to the end of the year, wrote the school-based test, and passed? So I'm just sharing some discrepancies with regards to policies. But I'm sticking to what I'm saying is that we need to manage those policies as best as we can. Hence, we have said that as a district, as assessment officials, we have identified that as a criteria that if a learner misses a task and it's a -1, that learner is a learner at risk. And we are very strict when it comes to signing off on schedules. If a school comes with a schedule of a -1, they need to provide evidence as to why is it a -1. My first question would be, what have you done to try and administer that task to the learner? And the school will have to provide me evidence to motivate me to sign off on that schedule, to agree with them. But it doesn't mean that they don't try their level best to still support that child. It's the same with the 0. If a child gets a 0 on a term schedule or a promotion schedule, we question it. Schools must come with evidence. And this is going to be spoken to more in the next sessions to come, whenever that is, where I always say that as a school, whether you're a teacher up to a principal, whatever you say to parents, learners, put it on paper. Make sure you have evidence of your correspondence with them. If a child is absent and you're trying to get a hold of the parent, even if you make a phone call, keep a record. On this day, I phoned this parent to speak about this. There was no answer. This is the time. Have some kind of evidence to show that you have tried your best to get a hold of the parent, but to no avail. I've had schools where they even screenshot and print from WhatsApp as evidence. Depending on what challenge is experienced by you, you need to have that evidence available for a -1 or a 0. And if really a child, because you have those kids, you try your best and your best is still not good enough. You can try to support them as best as you can, but they still don't meet the requirements. At the end of the day, you as an educator or as a school, you need to be in a position to clarify that you have done everything in your power to assist that learner or to get that learner to write the test or task. Remember with National Assessment Circular 1 of 2021 as well, the school-based test replaces the exam, but it doesn't mean that it's not under exam conditions. So, for example, your grade 4 learner who is sitting down for the very first time under exam conditions, psychologically, that child can be phased out once handed the paper on the day of the test. It's important to note that according to that circular, we teach to assess. It's assessment for learning. So as a school, if you, let's say, are using these criteria, you must be in a position to say, when you contact a parent, ma'am, sir, based on these criteria, we have identified your learner, your child as a learner at risk or a combination of criteria. We as a school, we endeavor to do 1, 2, and 3 to assist your child. But as a parent, we expect from you 1, 2, and 3. Have it on paper. Let the parents sign that. Have evidence of communication with parents. Come the end of the year, we don't want parents to come and appeal. And you get those parents that take chances. You must be able to say, as a school, we have these criteria to identify learners at risk, irrespective of whether or not the province or DBE have retracted the process. We have taken it upon ourselves. This is what we have done. We have communicated it to our parents. They know. We've communicated to parents once we have identified their child. We've mentioned to them what are we going to do to try and support that child. And that support will be aligned to the challenge experienced in that subject by that child. We must have evidence of supporting that child from the time we've identified that child as a learner at risk up until the end of the year. And hopefully that child passes on his or her own merit. And I'm sure I'm going to get questions at the end of the session like I did yesterday, where you have those learners that they just don't come to school. They just don't come to school at all. And what do? We must understand that we are dealt with cases, or we are dealing with cases every day. Some cases are completely new. Other cases, we know it's a constant trend. We know by now how to deal with them. But what I want to share with you is that if you take this good practice of mine or us as a district and you try to implement it this year, please get your teachers involved and try and sell this to your parents, because they must understand that it is for the benefit of their child. You are not saying that their child will fail. You are saying that your child is identified as a learner at risk, and you are in a position to say why. But come the end of the year, you must be in a position to provide evidence of supporting that child. Please, the other, what can I say, advice I can give you is that as a school, whether you're a teacher or a principal in the session, focus on your school. Forget about the other schools and what the other schools are doing. Sure, if they are doing something that you want to embed as a good practice, 100%. But you are not forced to do what the other schools are doing. Focus on your school, focus on your environment, focus on your learners, and do what is best for all of you within your environment. That's the most important thing. And I also always say to my set coordinators, share amongst each other, share schools, twin schools. If you have a school that's nearby and you want to implement something like this amongst the two of you as schools, get together and do it. Nothing stops you. As a district official, I will be happy if I come to a school and you have something like this in place. And I can tell you that in my district currently, there's good practice because it worked for us last year and because the process was retracted again this year. We are going to refine our criteria based on what we are currently experiencing, and we are going to continue with this identification process across the GET. So, colleagues, in a nutshell, in conclusion, we have to identify learners at risk. We don't want to be a teacher in the classroom and we don't even know who the learners in our classes are that are not meeting our requirements. We don't want to be a principal sitting at the end of the year, ask the question of, how have you supported these learners that have now failed? At least if you decide to do something like this process, you are in a position to say, but this is what we've implemented as a school. This is what we have implemented as a district. From experience, it worked for us last year. And I really hope that if this session was beneficial to you, and if you do try to implement some kind of system like this or similar to this, I really hope, and in fact, I know you will, number one, you will improve your school results as a whole. I know that you will not be deemed an underperforming school. And I know that an amount of appeal cases that you might have will be to a bare minimum. But the most important thing is that whether you're a teacher, whether you're an HOD, a deputy principal, a principal, or an assessment official in a district, you will be able to account to say, we have tried something. And this is what we've tried. Because you know, at the end of the day, and I said it in yesterday's session, the child is always right, unless you can prove that you've done everything in your power to try and assist that learner at risk or possible learner at risk. Thank you, colleagues. My mouth is actually dry. I hope that I've done justice to the session. Aki and Musa, over to you.
Wonderful, Trishen. Thank you so much for that. Ike, would you like to conduct the answers and the question and answers?
No, I think it worked well yesterday, Musa, so you can go ahead with it.
No problem. I think the first thing I want to do at this point is just launch the polls to allow those of us who are unable to stay during our extended time to just participate in giving us feedback. But, you know, as Trishen has said, this is one of possibly two, maybe even three sessions where we will be, you know, discussing this topic. So today we were able to say, how do we identify the learners? And I just want to hear from the ground, because the question and answer was very quiet compared to yesterday. But if you have that burning question, now is the time to ask it. If you could just click on our question and answer or raise your hand so we can speak to you directly. Is this a process that you see working at your school to identify learners? Is there some issues that you're having that are specific to your school that you want to highlight? And maybe you have good practices as well. This would be a good forum for us to share those and see what works for us. So while we go through that polls question, I'm going to now attempt to connect to some of the colleagues that have their hand up. I have Dolly Sono, who has their hand up. I think there was someone else. I think they've since put it down. But Dolly Sono, we've just given you a mic. If you could unmute yourself and please talk to us.
Okay, good day, colleagues.
Yes, good day.
My question, thank you very much for a powerful presentation. As a new principal, I think I needed this. It's been an eye-opener on my side. I've heard the presenter talking about maybe the two schools that are those that can use the same strategies, especially in identifying these risk learners. So we am at secondary, which is grade 8 to 12, and I have my feeder school. We've been trying, but with the information I have today, I feel that I'm very much fit to move on. So on my side, it's not a question, it's just a pleasure on my side. Thank you very much for a powerful presentation.
That is also very much welcome. Thank you very much, Dorothy. And as you can hear, she's a new principal. Trishen. She's been very assisted by this topic, and I'm glad to hear from it. We also have Trishen Mangwana. Trishen Mangwana, I'm coming to you next. And then if I could also ask Tango C to be on standby, and then we will go to William Madi Major. But let's start with Trishen. Trishen, please pose your remarks. We hear you loud and clear, Trishen. Just speaking to the mic. Trishen, are you there? All right. I am going to pause Trishen for a minute. Looks like he's having technical issues. And let me go to Walter Ngosi. Walter, please unmute yourself and talk.
Good morning.
I'm still getting
Yeah, I think Musa, we could move on. We can just mute him and he can put his comment on the chat.
yeah, him. Everything we're hearing is late. So I'm just going to allow for a few minutes for that artifact to play itself out.
Musa, if I can come in.
Go ahead, Trishen.
Maybe the signal is weak on his side. If he can rather than put his question on the chat.
Yeah, but the problem now is that he's already started speaking. I've actually muted him, but he's still coming through. All right, I think he's finally cleared. Apologies there, everybody. Looks like Ntlasheni's signal is extremely delayed, and we were getting the artifact of what he was trying to say. Still coming in. But let me at this point allow this time to actually read some of the questions that came in the chat before I give William a chance. Just some apologies from one of our regulars who's saying they're attending another meeting and so are not able to join us today. If you are like them, you either joined late or you had to leave, you are reminded that we will be sending links to this recording that you can enjoy at your own time. Now that we've been able to see the sound from one of our attendees there disappear, I'm now going to try and connect William. William, if you could just unmute yourself, sir, and make your remarks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, William, I hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my question is on the learners that miss a task. I'm asking the presenter, I have noted that is Circular 1 of 2021, that is 8.3. Can the presenter repeat a little bit the core of these learners that miss a task, -1? Thank you. Hello?
Okay, I have your question. Thank you, William.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Musa, if I can go to the first speaker as well. She mentioned something about her feeder school and that she's comfortable now as a new principal to try and implement a system of identifying learners at risk. I want to then motivate her or encourage her to share that in her next principals meeting, maybe to try and get more people on board with regards to this process. In terms of William, yes, William, you are correct. National Assessment Circular 1 of 2021, 8.3. It speaks about the school-based tests for the mid-year process this year and then the end of the year school-based test. It basically says that if a learner missed these tests, you put a -1. But you as a school need to first try your best to administer that task before the end of the term so that you can get that learner a mark. Now, if you tried everything, you must be able to prove what is it that you have tried to administer that task before you put the -1 and provide that schedule to your district office or your DAT for ratification. When it comes to a normal task or an activity that forms part of your SBA, we know that -1 on SSMs means it's absent due to valid reason. Now, we must understand that we are here to serve learners, and we as a school need to try our best, like the mid-year school-based test or the end of the year school-based test. We need to try our best to try and administer that task to the learner. And if all else fails, provided we have the necessary evidence that we've tried everything, we administer a -1. And when you administer a -1 to any activity or a task, SSMs automatically takes the weighting of that task, the weighting in terms of the SBA of that task, and it shares it amongst the remaining SBA tasks for that subject in that grade that's left for the rest of the year. I hope I answered William. Thank you, Musa.
Thank you, Trishen. Let me now move into Millicent Kanyile. Millicent has raised their hand up, and I'd like to give them opportunity to speak. Millicent, if you could just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, okay, thank you, colleagues. Unfortunately, I joined the meeting, the webinar late. Maybe the question I'm going to raise, maybe the answer has been given to it. But I just want to check in the case of term 2, because the schools closed maybe a week before. It might happen that some schools didn't finish the administration of the tasks. And now the term begins. What is going to happen to those schools? Maybe most, I assume, they have administered assessment for term 2. But what is going to happen maybe to those few that couldn't finish writing the administration of those tasks in term 2, in terms of capturing the marks and so forth? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Millicent. Okay, I don't know which province you're in, but it's irrespective of which province you're in. Because of the closure, the early closure by the president, schools must still administer those tasks or the remaining tasks from the time schools obviously started again now in term 3. That should be the priority. we cannot put a -1 for that. So the priority of every school will be to complete the mid-year school-based tests that they were supposed to. Then post-moderate, quality assure, and submit to your DATs for ratification. Only after that can you provide feedback to parents and learners in the form of your report cards. So that process still has to take place, but one must bear in mind that we cannot put a -1. We have to complete that process, or we have to complete the term 2 process during the course of, well, we've had now 2 weeks. I can tell you from my personal experience, we are collecting term 2 results from our schools next week, Thursday and Friday. So our schools had, from the time they reopened up until maximum today, to complete their tests, whether or not they are using their alternate day timetables, whether they have all of their learners back already, so that it gives them time to complete the post-mod and quality assure their term schedules before they submit to us for ratification come the 5th and the 6th of August. So that's just my process for our district. But in terms of your question, yes, you must make sure that those processes are closed and you have to complete those tasks. Yes, you will have those learners where even now they are not back. In that case, don't let them hold you back. Put a -1. And what will be your evidence? Your evidence will be the copy of the register. Take a copy of the register when you are going to submit your results and show the DAT official that the child missed the task last term. The president closed, and up to now, 2 weeks later, this child has been absent. So we as a school could not administer the task. I hope I've answered you, ma'am Millicent. Thank you, Musa.
Thank you very much, Trishen. I thought that was a very, very, very good question. I'm looking at the polls, they're looking good. 88% of us, 87% of us have been able to participate in that. If you're not finding the poll, if you just move your mouse or press the Alt key on your keyboard, you will see the Zoom bar will appear with all the icons, and one of those is the polls. It'll be very interesting to us to hear how you enjoyed this session. I'm not seeing any further questions, and I'm tempted to draw this meeting to a close in the absence of any further questions. IK, do you second?
Thank you so much, Mo. So I always say that, lack of questions means that either people understand it or people do not understand it, and you've given them the opportunity to actually express that. And I keep seeing lots of gratitude from Namaledi says the information that has been shared is very powerful, and we assist a lot in secondary school. Usually certain subjects are given more priority than others due to poor performance. This makes teachers not to have time to pay attention to the learners at risk in their subject. This is coming actually from the session, which is actually great. So I think we have done justice to this. Trishen has actually done justice to this. The next thing that I always say is we need to actually practice what we have learned. And these are actually best practices. So we are saying if this actually suits your style of intervention or what needs to be done in your school, please incorporate it. However, we need to know that everything that we do has to be backed by policy. Trishen, I see your hand up. Please, do you have anything to say?
Yes, okay. I just want to comment on Normal Lady's question or statement on the chat. Remember, I'm sharing good practice. I'm always telling my schools, my SAT coordinators and HODs, deputy principals, that according to that last sentence, it makes the teachers not have time to pay attention to the learners at risk in their subjects. We must understand that now we are teaching to assess. That's number one. So we are not preparing the learners It's not teaching of assessment, it's teaching for assessment. So there are various things that she can do from a point of view with regard to the challenge that she's experiencing in terms of the lack of time, is that teachers need to focus on their planning of their lesson more, and the actual execution of that lesson. Focus more on the teaching and learning process. Break up tasks into different activities. For example, if you have a test out of 50, according to SAMS, you have a test out of 50. Nothing stops you as an educator to break up that task into 2 different activities of 25 marks and 25 marks. Meaning you teach up to where you are going to assess the first part of the 25, and then you teach the rest of the 25 and then assess for the remainder of the 25 marks. By breaking up the task into various activities, you are basically assessing as soon as the learners have been taught the lesson. So their comprehension of the topic is still fresh. And it also allows them to benefit more because they won't have more information to study. Remember, I said we try our best to assist the learners where we can. And this is, I'm giving you ideas as to how you can best do that. And then for MEM specifically, I always tell my schools that the workbook should be the primary source of support. Teaching and learning must be clear in that notebook. Examples, definitions, informal activities that are marked in pencil, where there's clear evidence of the teacher giving feedback. Then teachers controlling at least 10% of every formal activity physically with a red pen. And then if they are sitting one-on-one with the learner, do it in the notebook. Show that you have sat with that learner physically with the notebook. Group your learners in your classroom. Pair them, weaker learners with stronger learners. Have group leaders so that peer assistance can also be used. Remember, a learner might understand something better from their peer than they are learning it from the teacher, him or herself. But the notebook is very important. I always say that a learner that is below average, there should be more red pen in that book than blue, because it shows the interaction. It's not to say that the child is not doing well. It's to show that the teacher has really tried his or her best to interact with this child or to interact with the class. When you are marking books, you don't have to mark books every day. You sit and you mark maybe 10% or 5% of learners' books every day. Come the end of the week, depending on how many subjects you have for the week, you might end up marking that entire class's workbooks. But because you are teaching to assess, it's important that you, by doing this process, have an understanding or a better understanding of where is that class actually in terms of what you are teaching. Do they understand? Don't they understand? And if they don't understand, are you really ready to administer that next task? So it gives you as a teacher a better opportunity to be in a position to assist your class. Remember, the ATP, it's not a race. You must remember it's not a race. But as much as we as a district or the province wants you to complete the ATP, we understand that you may be sitting with the challenge of learners not understanding. Hence, we are saying that it is vital that teachers focus more on the teaching for assessing. Like I said earlier as well, there's a lot of challenges that are faced by many schools, but you need to, through your SMT and through your CLE division at your district office, speak to one another, communicate to see how best you can achieve from each other. Talk to other schools that are experiencing the same problem. Talk to schools that are doing well and find out what are they doing that is different to try and complete the work, and to ensure that they are giving the adequate support and the real amount of support needed by the learner. Communication is key. You know, I can go on and on and on and refer you to documents, etc., but I don't want to do that. Colleagues, communicate. Communication, key. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Trishen. I think on that note, we will, perhaps if any further questions, we will close the session. Maybe what I'll do is just read one last comment here from a colleague. We have Julia Scott saying they're saying apologies, need to sign off to attend another meeting. But Julius and all the colleagues who couldn't join us can still participate and hear the question and answer session when we send them the link. Please look out for that. I think on that note, there's nothing left except to introduce you to our team in the next slide here. As you can see from different provinces, we have provincial managers, some taking care of 2 provinces. I'm looking at you, Zivai. Zivai is actually here with us from Gauteng and Mpumalanga. Thank you for joining us, Zivai. But if you are in the province and are needing assistance, please don't hesitate to contact any of these provincial managers, and any other issue that you might be having or assistance you're requiring. There's also our help desk, the email address there at the bottom, along with the phone number. Please don't hesitate to contact us, whether it be need to log into the dashboard or following up how far you are from getting the pack that we've promised. Please don't hesitate to contact us. I think with that, nothing remains except to thank Trishen one more time for availing himself in today's session, which is absolutely valuable from what I'm hearing. Thank you, Trishen, and please stay tuned as we will communicate the next time Trishen will be with us to continue in the subject of learner and subject intervention. Nothing else to say except have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us. Any final words there, Trishen? And then IK, please take the mic immediately after.
Thank you, Musa. I just want to say it again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share the good practices. I'm always willing to assist, and I'm always willing to learn. We must remember that we are all learning every day, irrespective of whatever position we hold. Thank you to the participants, and you guys must have a blessed, relaxed weekend.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Trishen. Thank you also for making sure that this webinar comes up live to us. Colleagues, I have learned a lot. I don't know about you, and having this much people still on the webinar shows that it's very important to us. Remember, we're going to be having a concluding part of this. So we'll be communicating that to you, but next we'll be having something different. Please just look at your emails. Also, alternatively, go to the D dashboard page, the login page, and see the upcoming webinar topics for you to always also register to attend. From my side, I want to say thank you to everyone, and let's do the same thing next week, same platform, same time, with a fresh new topic. Have a blessed weekend. Bye.